Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams. Welcome back into our Dog Nation Happy Hour, poured by Classic City Lager here on this Thursday afternoon. Getting ready for Georgia and Vanderbilt on Saturday. There's a lot to cover about that game, but also some things happening around the program we'll also discuss as well. Welcome in former UGA All-American City Lager Stinchcomb to do all of that. John, hard to believe we've reached the home finale for Georgia on Saturday. It's a weird season, obviously, and Georgia played fewer home games this year than it has in the past, but nonetheless, it is a season that has gone by really quickly. To think that Dog fans will get a chance to be between the hedges for the last time on Saturday. Hard to believe that it's all happened so fast.
It really is, and I'm just grateful that they were able to pull off what they have. I mean, we've had fans in the stands all season long and relatively safely. I think the plan in place was executed well. You know, you're always doing tweaks here and there, but from week one, or from our first home game, our stands have had more folks in them than I think relatively any other stadium out there. And I've heard very few complaints from people that are actually in the stands. So I'm grateful that 2020 was able to provide us football, and UGA did it in a way that I think we should all be pretty proud of.
I'll also say this. You used that word pride. I do have a sense of pride in Georgia's ability to pull this off. The fact that the only game that thus far Georgia has missed, it missed because of someone else's doing, not its own failings when it comes to handling the coronavirus. And listen, it's a contagious disease. There's only so much anyone can do to mitigate against those factors, but Georgia has seemingly handled its business really well. I'll take it a step further too, John. I know this may come across as corny, but the fact that Greg Sankey drew such a hard line in the sand this week as the SEC commissioner, but the SEC's intent to still play its 10 regular season games, even though the ACC has decided to recalibrate its situation and give Notre Dame and Clemson the week off ahead of the ACC title game coming up on December 19th. Obviously my greatest sense of pride for this season would have been for Georgia to play for an SEC championship, to go to a national championship type, situation. But if that's not going to happen in a year in which I was firmly of the belief that our society needed football as a way of just kind of keeping the train on the tracks, the fact that college football has been able to provide that, the SEC has led the way in doing so. As corny as it sounds, I'm actually pretty proud of that.
No question. I am as well. And it's come at some sacrifice. I mean, a lot of people, including 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old young men, have had to make some difficult choices and prioritize playing football over some social engagements and other opportunities that I think for those of us who were able to experience college, you couldn't do it in the same way this year if you still wanted to be on the team and on the field. I think you see across the board where it only takes one guy to make a personal choice that jeopardizes the entire situation. So to witness Georgia make that commitment, and you're never going to fully encapsulate and insulate yourself from the outside, but I think Georgia's done an exceptional job, and I appreciate the fact that SEC has carried the banner from the jump. I flash back to July when the question wasn't whether or not there's going to be a 10-game season. It was whether there's going to be a season at all. And Commissioner Sankey and the entire SEC put together a plan that was flexible enough to accommodate for some hiccups along the way, but also something that I think we all should be proud of. We've gotten in a full season and still plan to execute. There's been some tweaks with the schedule, which I'm sure was a nightmare for some poor soul out there. But for us, we've been able to at least adjust and still have the plan in place that was put together so many months ago.
I think that's right. And it's our Dog Nation Happy Hour with John Stinchcomb here, poured by Classic City Lager. John, let's also move on to some news related to Georgia football right now. Story up at dognation.com earlier today that Georgia center Trey Hill has had surgeries on both of his knees, and this now could keep him out for the rest of the season. The Athens Banner-Herald saying it's a meniscus situation that Hill has dealt with. There have been some talk of potential personnel changes along the offensive line during the season. Ultimately, that never really happened. Trey Hill maintained his spot there as the Georgia center. And now it seems like due to injury and recovery, he's going to be taken off the field. John, there's a couple things I'm curious about for you here. If it's Hill stepping off and Warren Erickson presumably stepping in place for him, How do you think this impacts the offensive line all the way around? Erickson's a capable player, but is not as experienced as a center as Trey Hill is. How much of an effect would we see this potentially have on the Georgia offensive line on Saturday?
I think Trey Hill's a really good center. When we talk about Trey so far this season, it's because of bad snaps. It's not because of his blocking ability. The guy has really come into his own. I think back to 2 years ago when he first really started taking those first string center reps, and there were some growing pains. I mean, it's quite an adjustment when the first thing you do is sling a piece of leather between your legs before you fire off on a guy that doesn't have to worry about that. So he's been able to make that adjustment. His play on the field has been at a really high level. The only concerns have come with the snaps. There was a few errant snaps, especially early in the season, but that sense has gone away. Now, the good news for Georgia is I think Warren Erickson is a very capable number 6. And when his number is called, he's played pretty well. He got that holding call on Saturday, which you go back and most offensive linemen are throwing up their hands and rolling their eyes because if they're going to call that, they can call it just about any play they want. But he's been very capable when he steps in. There's going to be, I would say, some adjustments. What Trey's able to do. He's a really powerful guy. And the way he's been able to create holes and create movement isn't very typical for a center. Most guys are able to position when they do well, but aren't able to generate the kind of movement that Trey does. And Warren, I think, is a guy who, when given the opportunities, has played at a high level. And I expect that for there not to be that much of a drop-off once he's in there. But it's tough to replace a guy like Trey.
When it comes to the challenges of being on the field as a center, we saw Erickson start in the Sugar Bowl. So obviously the guard spot instead of the center spot. He's a guy that came up as a center. That was his expected position at Georgia. And yet, he hasn't had the number of reps that Trey Hill has. In terms of, we think of the center, kind of calling out the Mike linebacker, things like that. Like how much of a job of, the cerebral stuff, the identification stuff does the center have there? And how much of a challenge will it be for Erickson to get acclimated to that part of the game quickly? And obviously the need for the other offensive linemen to gel around him for these, remaining games. Even if Erickson is a talented player and a capable player, and I think you and I both believe that he is, there are still some growing pains anytime you work someone in as a starter for the first time, right?
Yeah, there's more mental demands on the center than any other position across the offensive line. Now, every one of them has to know what they're doing and understand what the various demarcations. If we're identifying the Mike linebacker, what does that mean to me? Everybody has to know how that plays out and falls out for the rest of them. But there's that added step of identifying and setting the defense, getting everybody on the same page. And I think that's where the experience is really to Warren's favor, because that's a difficult spot. Usually, you have all of training camp, you prepare for this moment as a center, and everybody gets on the same page. The other thing that works for Warren's favor is you've got a group that's played next to each other for most of the season. This week 8 now. So they've been able to kind of understand what to expect, even with some new pieces. But, when you're sitting next to Ben Cleveland, a guy who's been in that fire a number of times, you can lean on guys and they can kind of help you make those adjustments just based on experience.
The other part of this I wanted to address here for a moment is, this is Trey Hill's 3rd year out of high school. Obviously has a possibility of considering the NFL if he wanted to. I'm not really quite sure what his plans would be, nor do I really know, how the NFL draft scouts would view him right now. But, given the fact that he's going through this procedure at this moment, how would that hamper him potentially as far as, if he wanted to consider the NFL draft? Does this make it a non-starter now? Is this the kind of thing, and I know you're not a medical professional, so maybe you're going to tell me you don't know, but is this the kind of thing that could be overcome in time to get ready for NFL Combine, things like that? Hearing this news today, given the fact that we're a couple of months away from the pre-draft process, if Hill wanted to go through that, how much do you think this might hamper that?
Minimally. I mean, speaking to a guy who's had 6 knee surgeries on a personal level, I mean, the way medicine has progressed and understanding that this isn't, it's not like he dislocated his entire knee. You're going to have to repair. This isn't an Alex Smith situation or Teddy Bridgewater, guys that have been out that you expect to be out for a couple of years. Do I know the exact ins and outs of Trey's medical condition? No, but I don't expect this to be anything major, and it's something that if it is meniscus, speaking from experience, you clean it up and you'll feel a lot better and be able to do a lot more once you get back. But that wouldn't be one of those red flags that NFL teams are going, this guy's damaged goods.
DMAR42 on YouTube asking about Clay Webb. That's another elite center that Georgia signed in a recent signing class, 5-star prospect.
Cedric Von Pond Granger. I mean, there's a few that.
That's exactly right. And I guess that's the point that I was, going to build to, is that right now it seems like Erickson was Georgia's number 2 center on the basis, John, of the pre-game warm-ups. To the extent that you read much into that, you usually see Cedric Von Pond working as the number 3 center. I'm assuming, at least in terms of the center pecking order, Van Pron's probably ahead of Webb right now. I think that when we see Webb competing for playing time in the moment, John, I get the sense that he's really competing more at the guard spot than the center spot. Not that couldn't change for 2021 or something along those lines. But right now, as you said, it's been Hill as your number 1. It's been Warren Erickson as your number 2. I do believe that Cedric Von Pron is Georgia's number 3 center. And then Clay Webb really kind of more competing for playing time right now, I believe, at one of those guard spots, because as you pointed out, Georgia has had a number of guys who either played center in high school, potentially projected as centers in college. At one point in time, even Jamari Salyer was projected as a potential center. So, Georgia's had a lot of those guys that could have potentially been the snapper for you.
Yeah, and coming into this season, I think our question marks was more at the tackle. Probably not Jamari Salyer, but the right tackle spot, just because you have so much talent on the inside. I think nobody really questions Trey Hill, the one returning starter in the spot that he's most familiar with. And then there was questions as to who would finally, percolate up to the top, thinking that Ben Cleveland probably had a spot. A healthy Justin Schaefer makes a lot of sense. But experience-wise, Warren Erickson's name, even Jamari is very talented on the inside. I think he's left tackle and done an outstanding job at that position, despite the fact that he's probably more of an interior guy, probably more where his comfort level is and his body type, though he's manipulated and molded that into a very highly functioning left tackle in the SEC, and a position that, quite honestly, BA, we don't really talk about that much because I think he silenced that. He replaced a top 5 pick in the first round of the NFL draft. And we're not talking about, there's growing pains at left tackle, which we could expect, mainly because he's silenced any possible criticism. He's done such a good job there. All that to say, circling back around, the interior is a spot where there's a number of talented guys that you felt pretty good about. I think the fact that Warren McClendon has been the one to kind of settle into that right tackle spot has allowed us to kind of transition, especially with this Trey Hill injury, back to focusing on the fact that there's so many either talented guys or prospective guys that you'd feel really good about, at least based on their 5 stars, 4 stars, that there's some serious talent on the interior of this offensive line. So whether or not it's Warren McClendon for now, and he might be a better transition to a guard position next year and have either Clay or Cedric step in at center. I think those are good problems to have. I think for most time on the interior, being able to transition from center to guard is a much easier transition than it would be from, say, interior line out to a tackle spot, which is, again, to commend Jamari Salyer on the job that he's been able to do this year.
It is our Dog Nation Happy Hour. It's poured by Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company. It's a great taste of Athens that you can get whether you're in the Classic City or not. Of course, if you are there, you can stop by and see them, and there's no tire facility right there in downtown Athens. But listen, whatever retailer you shop at for your groceries and your essential household items, Classic City Lager going to be on stock there as well in 6 and 12-pack cans. It's available year-round. It's a lager-style beer, which means it's, a lighter beer, but there's no sacrifice on flavor. It is just good cold beer. So make sure you check out some Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company today. John, let's turn our attention now to Georgia on the field more on Saturday against Vanderbilt. And obviously, I guess the big headline for me is, and Kirby Smart's talked about this both in terms of a sentimental factor, which always works on me, but also a motivating factor as well, the Georgia seniors, many of which will be playing their last game. Some have the choice of coming back. We don't quite know yet who will and who won't, but it is for most the final game they'll play between the hedges. And for a Georgia senior class, if they can get the win against Vanderbilt and then against Missouri and then a bowl game after that, would have a chance to be the winningest senior class in program history, which is something that Smart says is a source of motivation for the team. You know, John, I love this stuff. You know, and this 2017 class in particular, the guys that make up most of the senior class here right now, these are guys that I just have great memories of when they came into Georgia. I'm always very sentimental on senior day. It's different this year because you're going to have the parents on the field, I'm guessing, and you know some of the hugs and kisses that are typically a big part of this. But still, for me, a really fun deal nonetheless. And I'm sure as someone who once went through this and had a brother that did the same thing a couple of years before you, I'd imagine for the Stinchcomb family, senior day at Georgia is a very special memory. I'm sure a lot of you guys have held off in your mind.
Well, there's so much blood, sweat, and tears that you pour into it for the 4 and sometimes 5 years that guys are on campus, and to realize this is the last time you'll be running between the hedges with a helmet on your hands. Next time you'll be coming back is for some alumni game where they recognize you and you're in street clothes. So it's important. I think it's really important to honor the guys that have done such a good job of representing our program and the university. But for them, it's a special moment of realizing, these were moments that you were picturing and dreaming of when you were that 16, 17-year-old kid on these recruiting trips, with your name tag on next to the Georgia girl on the sideline going, this is going to be me next year. And to realize this is your last chance to run between the hedges and represent with a G on the side of your helmet. I think for this class, it's even more special, knowing what they have an opportunity to accomplish, the winningest class in Georgia history. That's huge. You can hold your head high with understanding that, and also facing an unprecedented senior year and leading your team through some adversity that no other team has had to face before this year. So it's a good opportunity. It's also really emotional for the guys to realize, man, this is the last one.
I'm curious, when you went through this, to the extent that you're willing to talk about this, you had to have a pretty good idea that you were going on in the NFL and you knew you're going to have a career there. So there's a way of saying, well, maybe I'm excited about the next chapter of my life. But for someone like me that grew up being a Georgia fan, and as a recruit, as you said, you're thinking about your college process. And then, like for a lot of us, it goes by just like that. Was it more excitement, optimism about the next phase of your life? Or was there a little sadness creeping in about the fact that I can't believe this part is over? And I'm presuming that you feel the way that some of us did. It goes by just so much faster than you ever think it would.
Well, having my brother come before me, I mean, we had spent so many Saturdays participating, watching in Georgia football. And, I had a pretty good inkling that this wouldn't be my last game, period. I mean, we were going on to SEC championship and we play in the Sugar Bowl and then NFL stuff. But it's an end of a chapter that, so many guys, this was a pinnacle. And it's important to my life. I'm still rocking G's on my pullovers because that time was so special to me. And, it's emotional before the game. And I think after the game, during the game, you're just trying to beat up for us, it was beating up on Georgia Tech, which, it was important because half those guys you'd played against and they were still chirping because they'd won a couple years ago, So there was other things tied to it.
51-7, I believe the final score that day was, right?
Yeah, that was a good one. Which is always good to pound on the folks an hour and a half down the road. Anyway, it's emotional just because, for me, you're looking at 8 years where people were like, are we ever going to get rid of Stinchcombs and playing for the Dogs? And that was the last one in between the hedges. So it was emotional, not only for me, but for my family, realizing that this would be the last time that my mom would be wearing a pin on her shirt and, just different.
Yeah, it is certainly the case. And for the guys who are going to play their last game on Saturday, John, Richard LeCount comes to mind. There are certainly, plenty of others. What I hope they would understand is, and it's difficult to know if they do, but, obviously they're going to miss out on that chance to win a national championship, something they were very close to doing a couple of years ago. But I truly am of the belief that if and when it does happen, I think for Georgia that breakthrough is going to occur eventually, but if and when it does happen, the foundation of a successful senior class, instilling Kirby Smart's culture, the way that he wants the program to be to run, the way that he wants it to operate, showing and demonstrating the level of commitment that's required. I know that these players won't get the national championship ring that Georgia teams and players of the future, I believe, will get. But I do believe the guys who are playing right now and the guys who are about to end their Georgia career will have a hand in that success. They will have made it more popular. For the five-star guys that chose Georgia at a time in which it wasn't quite as trendy back then as it probably is now, they've paved the way for it to be easier for other people to choose Georgia. And by setting a high standard on the football field, it just gives one more bar for future players to have to work hard to achieve here. I do believe that's true. And I hope the Georgia players that are a part of this and have contributed to this over the last 4 years, I hope they realize just how true that is, frankly.
Agreed. And I don't know if you do at the time, but for us, we always want to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us. And you never want to be that class, that couple of classes that lets the curve dip. You always want to be the ones that, man, we really turned this thing around. And if there's a turning around needed, now Georgia, I mean, we're trying to just continue to inch that bar up just a little bit higher. And this might not have been the end to 2020 that everyone was hoping for, but you're still building that foundation. You're creating an identity and instilling a culture and character in this locker room that can carry over and carry on. And, Richard LeCount is a great example of a guy that has influenced and carried the banner for this team in the culture and the locker room and the passion that he's played with. It's been infectious for fans. So you have to believe it's the same thing in the locker room, and he's not alone. This entire group has made winning something that's expected around Georgia. And that's not always been the case. I mean, for the past, we've been fortunate that the bar continues to be risen. You keep raising the bar. There we go. My mom's an English teacher, and she's furious at me not right now, BA. But just
no problem.
Keep it rolling, man.
It's late on a Thursday afternoon. By this point in the week, I think the synapses start firing a little slower for all of us. But I certainly understand the point that you're making on that. And Phil Rogers, watching on Facebook, says he wants to see Georgia beat Florida next season. And I am of the belief that the work that's done Saturday against Vanderbilt, remaining games of the season, certainly give you a chance to do that, to lay the foundation so that can happen next year. And John, to that point, when you think about what's going to happen on the field against the Commodores on Saturday, we've seen Georgia 30-plus points the last 2 weeks, 45 points against South Carolina on Saturday, comfortable win against the Gamecocks. The Vegas folks will tell you that 35.5 is the number on Saturday. At least that's where it has been for good portions of this week. Whether Georgia, gets close to that or exceeds that, finding a way to put points on the board again, finding a way to have a comfortable margin of victory once again, that to me would not be a completely hollow achievement. That to me would be the kind of thing that where the Georgia seniors could certainly feel like, hey, we equated ourselves admirably here at the end of the year. But for the younger guys who are looking to, as Phil said, to get back at it and win some of these rivalry games and big games that are going to come next season, to finish strong this year, I think, at least to a degree, I think it would make success next year more possible.
Yeah, and I would think, and I would assume, I would also hope that this team isn't focused on 2021, that they are understanding that 2020 is still the games that we're playing right now. We're not done. Were we able to accomplish the goals that we wanted when we set out this season? No, but we're not done yet. I mean, there's more games to be played, and the next one is against Vandy. And, that's where our focus is. And for these seniors, yes, they want to create the culture. Yes, they want to improve the program. But this is the last chance opportunities that we get to leave our marks as players on the field. So is there something still left to be proven? You better believe it. I mean, these guys have invested a lot of time into their college careers and their time at Georgia. And yes, I think it very much matters as to how you finish the year and how you carry over through the off season, and it'll help 2021 if you build momentum and you just stomped a SEC East opponent, which is their arrows pointing the exact opposite way with guys bailing on the team. And I mean, it's just not nearly as good. You lose your head coach. All that to say, their focus is on Saturday. Yes, those are all benefits, but ultimately, here we have a chance to finish on a high note. We still have games in 2020, and they're important to us. I think guys are really taking pride in what they're doing, and that was evident on Saturday against the Gamecocks.
It's John Stinchcomb. I'm Brandon Adams. It's our Dog Nation Happy Hour, poured by Classic City Lager, a great taste of Athens from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing. 6 and 12-pack cans. You can check it out wherever you shop. It is just good cold beer. It is Classic City Lager. John, at the time we have left, I want to talk about another issue. And, of course, you remember the athletic board, so this is near and dear to your heart. But Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity has announced his plans to retire. There was a published report the other day listing potential candidates for the job. Your name came up on this list. So I have to at least ask you as a way to start this conversation and I mean this actually in seriousness, is working full-time in athletic administration something that you would ever have an interest in doing?
Sure. Yeah, I would love that position. Now, looking at the list and knowing some of the qualified candidates that are vying for this position, the guilt that you would get, but knowing that more qualified, better prepared individuals like Josh Brooks, who he's currently the interim. There are folks, the athletic director position at the University of Georgia is one of distinction that across the nation, whether you're attached to Georgia or not, people would covet this role, guys that are very qualified. I mean, this will be a national search where candidates from across this country that are have been in this position at their current universities and have been preparing for this position for a long time. We're not at some rinky-dink college that's needing a turnaround or a new face or a new image. I think Greg McGarity has done a great job of stabilizing finances. He's brought back Coach Smart, made a difficult decision with Coach Rick, brought in Coach Crean. The facilities around Athens have improved across the board. I mean, the University of Georgia athletically is at a position that is being coveted from not only the country, but across our own conference, where guys and other colleges are looking at what we're doing and understanding the financial position that we're in, despite the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, that Greg McGarity has brought us to this position. And I understand and have heard for a number of years, there have been naysayers and folks that weren't exactly in Greg's camp. But I think he's positioned us in a way that whoever does get this position will have earned it, because the list of candidates will be so strong. And candidly, I think that starts with a guy who's already in-house in Josh Brooks.
What do you think the next couple of years are going to look like when it comes to Georgia's athletic department, but also the college sports landscape in general? Georgia seemingly has been raising money very well the last few years and seemingly doing a good job of spending that. Indoor facility, the West End Zone project, the new football-only building are the things that come to mind, top of mind for someone like me who's as obsessed with football as I am. It seems like that Georgia has done a good job of raising the capital for this and then, putting forth really nice-looking buildings as a response to all of that. But for the next couple of years, what do you think comes next here for Georgia from an athletic standpoint? And what are the questions and the issues that really matter for the next athletic director, no matter who it ends up being?
Well, I think we're going to see a shift. Candidly, I think we're almost overdue for a shift in what the NCAA does in a broad sense. We've seen such turmoil in the basketball arena of paid players, one and done. We've seen a little bit of that close to home, where they're the first pick in the NBA draft, spent a few months on campus, and I think there's ways that it's helped Georgia, but it's part of that consideration. And then the unrest that we've seen in college football. So athletic directors across this country, I think, are going to have to deal with a diverse cross-section of issues that athletic directors up to this point probably haven't faced. Now, position-wise, you look at because of the fundraising and the support that the Dog Nation has afforded the University of Georgia, Georgia's not the only one to invest in facilities. I mean, the arms race across this country, I'm thinking about Clemson, Alabama, most of the SEC, where you're trying to improve your facilities. Georgia's one of the few that's been able to pay their bill as it's due, and that's because of the donors and the support and the fan base getting involved. I'm thinking of Texas A&M is probably a good example where you're not incurring such crazy debt and carrying on for generations. Candidly, we're probably still paying off some renovations that were made in Athens in the 90s, which is considered pretty good debt at this point. But we're able to make these improvements because of the fan base. I mean, the Dog Nation has got involved and supported all these investments in facilities, which so many other campuses haven't. And in this year, boy, doesn't that hurt you, because you're saying we've got these reserves. Some of them do, most of them don't, to kind of weather this storm. Well, everybody is losing money overall as an athletic department just because of 2020's unexpected pandemic. I mean, you lost out on basketball revenue from their tournament and all the sports over the summer, end of spring, most of the fall. So it's been damaging for so many different universities. Georgia has been able to kind of buffer that better than most because of the fan support.
How do you think Greg McGarity will be remembered?
Oh, man, that's a great question, because, I've been on the receiving end of those that have been very critical of Greg at times. And I've had conversations with Greg because I feel like he took more bullets than he deserved, where shots were fired and he was willing to absorb them on behalf of other folks. And it's probably to his credit that he's, as a leader, was willing to take some of those shots for his team, if you will. But I, on a personal level, have nothing but respect for him and the way that he's led the University of Georgia. Hopefully he's remembered for bringing in Kirby Smart. He's developed our facilities and got us back. I mean, how far behind were we on an indoor practice facility, right? I mean, this is all under Greg's reign. Now, there's obviously some discouraging remarks that have circulated in the past, but I hold him in a really high regard, and I think he's progressed the athletic department in Georgia in a way that I think is commendable.
Well, John, that's great to hear your insight on that. As obviously someone who's as close to the situation as you are. I appreciate that here in our Dog Nation Happy Hour. And as we turn our attention back again to Georgia and Vanderbilt on the way out the door here, I'm sure you're like everybody else, just looking forward to seeing what hopefully will be another big win for Georgia, a nice way to close out the home portion of the season. And John, I don't want to get too much into this here today because we'll have more time to talk about this in the future. But a potential game against Missouri, with the Tigers suddenly playing better, I think on Friday we'll find out exactly when the Georgia-Missouri game is going to take place. But all of a sudden that game feels like a little bit better conclusion to the season, a better measuring stick than it would have been before. So take care of your business for Vanderbilt, and it sets up for a little more fun game against Missouri than was originally anticipated.
Well, I think if we weren't able to, and it wasn't because of Georgia, it was really because of the COVID infections in Missouri's camp. But if that game was played, 3 weeks ago, that's a much different Georgia team. Obviously a better Missouri team than I think some people were expecting. But I think we're a much better Georgia team than we were. You're kind of coming off a couple losses, 2 out of 3, and just not really having that identity. And you have to be much more confident with JT Daniels' performance these past couple of weeks, and then the run game just running through a defense that could not stand up against South Carolina. But that should be a really good game, better than expected, at least on paper, at any point in the season, and something that I think it's going to be more of a test than Georgia fans would probably want, but we'll see that when we get there.
Well, John, thanks so much for being here, part of our Dog Nation Happy Hour presented by Classic City Locker. To the rest of our audience as well, thank you for tuning in here on Thursday afternoon. Fun to set the stage what's going to happen against the Dogs and the Doors coming up on Saturday. So all of you enjoy the game. Enjoy yourself a little bit of Classic City Lager as well. And we'll look forward to talking to all of you again very soon as well. Have a great afternoon, everybody.